Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrii. Good to be here on the stage together with you. While people are gathering, I'll do my introductions so you won't miss the main part. Let's test this one. Okay. So today in the talk, I'd like to touch the subject of balancing the delivery speed and maintaining the reliability of our systems and products. And I'll look from several angles, one from the engineering and organizational, to give you a perspective from both sides. But first, couple words about me. So I'm engineering manager here at Superhuman. Many of you know us as Grammarly, so now it's a brand name. I'll tell about that. I work with a variety of different teams here. And a number of different initiatives, starting from those that were focused on really moving fast, shipping to production within weeks, days, and the initiatives that had more like quality focus and maintaining reliability of the systems. And prior in my professional services career, I've worked also with companies and teams from small, nimble startups to larger enterprises that were more conservative, but still trying to reinvent themselves and move faster. So this is the background from which I'll be talking today, and I have a few principles that I was able to derive from that experience, and that we'll talk later. But few words about the company, what's that about? So many of you hopefully know Grammarly and maybe even used it before. So we started in 2009 as the communication assistant, and over the years we've grown to 40 million or over 40 million daily active users. And we work across millions of different apps and websites, so quite a large surface. But today we have a bold new vision that spans way more than just the writing assistant. We want to help you get things done. And earlier this year, we acquired a couple of companies, Coda and Superhuman Mail. I'll tell about them. And we also changed our brand name to Superhuman. So what is Superhuman? It is an AI productivity platform that gives people one connected suite of apps and agents that understand their work and helps them in their work. So AI that complements you rather than trying to replace you. As part of that suite, we have four main apps. One is Grammarly, hopefully the one that you know very well. The other one is Coda, all-in-one document collaboration platform. The third one is the email, or the Superhuman Mail. This is a modern AI-focused email client. And our newest addition to the family, the Superhuman Go, the proactive AI assistant, which I'll explain a bit in a minute. Before I dive into the core of the talk and the principles that I promised, I'd like to start with the two short but contrasting stories that happened with me over these years at Superhuman. This all touching the experience of how we're able to balance this speed and still kind of maintaining good bar for the reliability. If you've used us, I hope you haven't noticed that much where the systems were down, and I think we're doing a pretty good job there. So the first one starts about 5 years when I joined Grammarly, and I joined as an engineering manager to lead our web editor team. The team by itself was quite small and nimble, moving fast. And Grammarly wasn't that large, but not small as well. So engineering overall about 150 people. We're growing quite fast, over 50% a year. So that's pretty rapid. But the teams, mine including, were able to perform at quite a good speed. So many features, but it took us like, if it's a small, weeks or days. It was quite a nice experience, though many would describe it as a roller coaster. Because the experience of my peer product manager could have been quite different when he tried to scale a fairly small feature that on a single team took like a couple weeks. On a scale of the whole organization and different surfaces, it took us in one specific instances almost 9 months. Not the bar we were striving for. And explain why it happened, a small nuance. If you look at the UX, the different surfaces where we work, so we had Grammarly web editor, the browser extension, the keyboards on mobile, we had Grammarly for Mac, Grammarly for Windows. All of those have, in a way, similar UX, but the tech stack is quite different. So this meant that engineers would have to recreate the code or duplicate the code for the features that we're trying to build. Not super efficient, and that's what partially caused those delays. And very quickly, a second example that happened to us fairly recently was launching this new Superhuman Go product. A few words, what's that? So I mentioned it is in the proactive AI assistant. It works on the infrastructure, the same infrastructure as Grammarly that we've built over many years. And we like it to compare, or our CEO likes it to compare it to AI superhighway, because if you know Grammarly as this tool that gives you suggestions like the small cards, on the surface it is, but underneath it's really quite significant infrastructure on how to deliver those things across the many different surfaces you work, and also connecting with the intelligence over multiple backends that we do have. So over these years, we had just one agent on this superhighway, and that agent was called Grammarly. And a few months ago, we put there dozens of different agents, both first party that we created and third party from other companies. So already by description, you probably imagine that this was quite a big effort, cross-functional, multiple different teams, dozens plus, took quite a bit of time. But in a specific case of subgroup that was working on delivering 10 specific agents for the release, tight timeline, 3 months, so on, they were able to turn over 50 different experiments and still manage not to crash everything and do a pretty good release. So these are two stories, hopefully quite contrasting in terms of like ability to move fast at scale. And this would push me to derive for this talk the 6 principles that I feel made it possible to scale. So let's jump with the first one. Yes, the autonomy in execution. Kind of a simple and trivial one. If you want to move fast, you need to be able to allow people who want to move fast to be fast. So like on individual level of a single engineer, product manager, or whoever is on your teams, they need to have the ability to do things as fast as they want to do. What this means in practice, do they have the access to the systems? Are they able to push the code where they need to? Are they able to do the changes in the system that they've never wrote a single line of code, and so on? And the interesting example from our own experience, we had probably just a couple of months ago an internal survey among engineers about the biggest blockers or the hurdles that slow them down. And what people put as the top one is the challenge of making or shipping a feature with the single change or unitary change. What that means is like pretty much like shipping a feature with one merge request or one PR. That's the reality of our world. We live in a poly repos, so you have to do multiple commits, multiple merge requests, a bit challenging. But just an example of what it means to be productive on the individual level from an engineer perspective, like just be able to push that code in. But there is another aspect to this autonomy in execution, the organizational one, how your teams are structured and what knowledge do you have. And in our example, in our case of Superhuman, that drills down to the structure of a team and the responsibilities that they have. Initially, and before even when I joined, when the company was quite small, maybe a couple of teams, they were quite functional oriented. What does it mean? Each team has its own surface that they own. They have clear area of responsibility. And it worked nice at the small scale, and kind of organically, the structures the structure that happens at a small scale. But as we're growing, obviously, working with that setup becomes challenging because there are initiatives that span multiple apps, surfaces, systems where the functional ownership doesn't cut. You need the expertise in backends, frontends, and like at that stage, dozens of different backends. So we experimented with virtual teams, pretty much like pulling people from the functional teams that we had and the temporary teams, and just tasking them with getting things done for whatever they need. But the problem here is temporary. What happens after that? And this long-term knowledge and the product doesn't stop after its first release. It evolves. And the temporary structure of virtual teams doesn't help there. So now we landed on a combination of the permanent cross-functional teams and groups and the functional as well. So the cross-functional can focus on things like experimenting heavily, whether it's the growth-related metrics, and the functionals can focus more on the quality related to the platform or an app or an agent, whatever you're building. And it works quite well for us so far. But autonomy to execute by itself could be nothing if you can't make a decision, let's say, to go to production or make a change. And so this brings me to my second point, the autonomy in decision-making. And when I say that, for many, this would probably mean like getting the approval from, I know, your manager, your leadership, or whoever, or kind of like a vertical autonomy in decision-making. But in our case, there is also a horizontal dependency in terms of making decisions. What I mean by that? So we have dozens of different engineering teams, and the goals of some of them are quite orthogonal. For example, growth teams that are focused on just running experiments to improve certain product metrics, like converting users, onboarding them, activating them. And there are teams who are focused on like actually raising the bar for quality of that specific product. So if the first group is mindlessly pushing their experiments out, they could harm the quality aspect. And then there's long dialogue and it slows things down. So not a pleasant situation. So what we came up with, I think, was pretty neat. A few years ago, that's when it roughly started, my team was working on a set of improvements and related to it also building out metrics for quality, which we call the text corruption metrics. What this means, when you see the card of the Grammarly and you hit to accept the suggestion, the accuracy of how we insert that text is pretty much, for us, is the case when the corruption can happen. If we screw up, it is a text corruption. So we build a set of metrics and we kind of push really hard for months to improve it, actually by multiple times. And we didn't want to just lose that job lose those results when other teams would start rolling their experiments. So what we did in partnership with our data teams is we took those metrics, refined them a bit, and put into our experimentation framework. What that meant is anyone in the company now could leverage those quality metrics when they run their experiments and push whatever changes they want. And later we open it up to other teams, so if the team feels like the metric is important, they could push it to this experimentation framework. It can be used all over the company. Pretty nice feature. So I touched a little bit the aspect of the vertical trust and decision-making, or like the vertical approval and decision-making. Usually disapproval in this vertical chain is based on distrust, or when there is no trust, or like the systems of trust in the organization, how decisions are made. And in order to build those systems, one of the key approaches in my practice was to establish a data-driven approach to pretty much everything, to making decisions, to drafting proposals, launching stuff, etc. So that's a third pretty important principle that I want to talk today. From one angle, it enables this vertical safety and trust. On the other angle, it allows freedom for teams to do what they need to do. But the other thing about the data is the following, and I like this analogy from the motorsports. When you look at the cars back in the days, they were still already quite powerful and fast. But if you compare them to the nowadays F1 Formula cars, they're pretty hard to compare. Much more powerful, much more maneuverable. The teams, the racing teams, are able to adjust their tactics. They're able to convey their decisions or changes to the pilot as they go. And this is very similar to nowadays teams that also need to course correct a lot. If you release a change, probably you will get a number of hopefully good feedback, but also a number of bad feedback from the users. You want to adjust it quickly without having any data. It's almost impossible these days. So data helps really move fast, and having a reliable experimentation framework, the system that teams can use autonomously, also helps insanely with the speed. So in our case, this means you release everything as an experiment or behind the gate. You immediately see how your change impacts any metric that is there that's important for the company, or the quality metrics that I mentioned, and you just make your decision there. And that decision is transparent to both your peer teams on the same level and as well as your management or founders if it's a smaller company. So that's the two autonomies and the important building block of the data, the first three important stuff. I've touched a bit the aspect of safety, which is by itself a very, very interesting. There are multiple different kinds of people, different kinds of teams, which have a different appetite for risk. And usually, if the people or the teams do not feel safe to make a change, they sometimes would say, no, we wouldn't do that. So building that safety, trust, and mechanism within the company, within the teams is important. But does it mean we just we can't just ship what we want? Or how to achieve that? Obviously, there are already a ton of companies on the market, like this modern days AI companies that are churning out features super fast, or even the already older ones, who has famous mottos for moving fast and breaking things. So obviously, it is possible. And I already touched a little bit that having the experimentation system that's usually paired up with feature flagging or gating capability does help you make a step in that direction. So it is already a building block of the safety net. But there are also other things when just isolating where your small feature is not enough. What if bug creep in? And usually it does creep in. The problems happen, the bugs happen. There are other things that help in establishing those safety nets. Things like quick rollback mechanisms, or even quick on-demand deployment for modern backends is probably nothing new. It's pretty well-known, well-developed. But if you're building a mobile app or a desktop app, like in many of my teams, that could be a challenge of its own. Or the near real-time observability, so we can respond to any incident. And an example from my realm, about 2-3 years ago, I joined our Grammarly for Windows team, and that product was just released, so pretty fresh and new, and the team landed on a fairly conservative approach to releasing it. It's a desktop app, so it's being pushed to tens of millions of machines that we don't control. I usually like to compare it to pushing to tens of millions of servers, but it's not the servers you own. They can go online and offline. They can update at their own pace. There's really a lack of control. And our cadence of releases was once every 2 weeks. Kind of fine, nothing bad about that. Not too slow, not too fast. But what we faced is at the end of every 2 weeks, the teams around us were coming can you wait for that release? Our feature is almost ready, and we want to be in the release. because it's another 2 weeks to wait. Or they might come the midweek saying, can we release sooner? We want to try and experiment a couple more times before your next release, and so on. So it's like always managing those things, and then we release it, and obviously if there's squeeze things last moment, there is a bug, we have to roll back. So quite a bit of pressure. So what we did is we invested a few months of improving our this 3 last things of the quick rollbacks, frequent on-demand deployments, and observability for a desktop app, and pretty much cut down to from once every 2 weeks to twice a week releases of the app. So every other day there is a release of the desktop app that goes to our users. And that made the magic, I would say. No questions coming. People know that every other day they will be able to ship what they need to ship, the experiment launch, and so on. Nice, neat. With that, I'm moving to my number 5, because building those improvements that I said, and for every good engineer, they're usually very good in spotting imperfections in our systems, and they're like, oh, it's imperfect, I need to improve. I improved it, now I need to scale it so other people and teams around would be able to reuse it. We'll build a platform or a framework or an SDK. Yes, it's kind of nice, but usually it takes time to build those platforms. And it's even more time to move away from them once they become obsolete or no longer relevant. And I like this approach, and the quote from one famous business person who told that it's good to build business on the assumptions that will not change in the next 10 years. It's kind of similar to platforms as well, but 10 years is a bit outrageous in our age of fast-moving things. So it's not 10 years. But it's still very relevant. If you invested a year in building some SDK platform to be used across the company, across the surfaces, it would probably take a couple more years if you decide to remove it or migrate off of it. And a very quick example of not so successful story from my experience, when we decided to solve the problem of build once and ship everywhere, back in the days at Grammarly, we invested also almost a year of building a platform called the server-driven UI in terms of how our cards are pushed. And after a year, amazing results are coming, quite nice. We're quite satisfied, so there's still work to do. But after another several months, we realized that the product direction and the environment on the market changed so much that the constraints of our platform were too constraining. And now we need to think about building something else and moving off the platform that we just invested a year. So that's a baggage and doesn't help us that much. Luckily, there are initiatives not as risky as this one that I described at the top of a product that's very user-facing or touching the experience of the users. There are always things like the data and experimentation infrastructure that would help in almost any case, or the deployment and development infra that's used by all engineers in the company. And even today, in the age where AI is writing a lot of code, that would still help. Because if it helps humans, likely it would help AI as well to do its coding part. Which brings me to my very last point, but I would say the most important one and the hardest one that impacts the speeds and also impacts the reliability indirectly, is focusing on the important stuff and really pruning also important stuff. Because on our lists, we always have multiple of things to do, and everything is important. And we have to sacrifice those other important things on something that really, really matters. So that's the last one. And I do still remember a conversation with my director a while ago when we were planning a quarter. And I was saying, like, look, if we go ahead with this plan, I would have at least one project per every engineer on my team, and we probably would not ship anything this quarter. Luckily, we didn't follow that plan and cut a lot and just left a couple of the initiatives, a couple of the projects that we wanted to go, and that worked. But focusing and improving is super important. So here are the 6 things, if you want to see them all together. The 2 autonomies, the data as a building block for them, and also building a safety net for the teams that they can experiment fast, they can ship, they can do whatever they want, and if their mistakes happen, there is a safety mechanism for that. If you decide to invest in platforms, be mindful. They're nice, but there are drawbacks in those, and of course, focus on the most important and kill other important things. Each one of these is nothing new, but all of them together what really made a difference for us and hopefully make a difference for you. Was that? Thank you very much. I'll be available here for Q&A right by the stage, or also during the day at our booths in the main area in the expo hall. And we can also stay in touch if it switches or not. Yes. Thank you.